So now it's time to make this scroll lootable. So what we want to do is when the player walks into the scroll, we are going to make it disappear, and the player gets some sort of points, or yeah, points for looting the scroll. So let's go over and click on the scroll. And what we want to do first, when the player walks into the scroll, something needs to happen. And for this sake, we actually need to add a trigger box or a collision box. So we need to add a trigger event. So let's add either a sphere or a box. And let's add a sphere collision for this one. Let me make it bigger here in the sphere radius. So just like this. I actually just want to move it away and see what it looks like in the world. And for this to happen, we need to click this hidden in game. We need to remove it. Let's see what it looks like. Looks like this. And let's try it maybe a bit smaller. Let's do 100 or 120 and see what it looks like. So now we have this sphere, and what we want to do is inside of the event graph, we want to click on the sphere, and at the bottom we have something called on component begin overlap. So what happens when you overlap with this sphere collision box? Okay, what we want simply to happen is just make it disappear so that the player has looted it. And this is very simple. This is just the destroy actor. And what actor do you want to destroy? I actually want to destroy self because we are inside of BP scroll. And so self as the target is correct. But I only want the player to collide with this scroll. So remember, if you have several enemies in the level and the enemy walks into this box, we don't want this box or this scroll to disappear. We only want it to disappear if the player walks into it. So in that way, what we have learned before, in the other actor, this is the actor that's overlapping the scroll. We can say actor has tag, and we can now assign a tag to the player. So if we go back to this BP ball, if we double click on it, and you write tag up here. So now we have this actor tag. Let's click on the plus, and here we can write player. So now we have given this BP ball the tag player. And now here in the BP scroll, in the begin overlap, we're going to say, does the actor has the tag player? If that is correct, so make a branch. Whoops, so make it, if that is true, then destroy the actor. If the actor does not have the tag player, for example, the enemies, then do not do anything. Let's go ahead and click play and let's see what happens. So if we walk into the scroll, it's supposed to be destroyed and is doing so. So the code works and this is working perfectly. So now what we want to do is every time you walk into the scroll, we want to add points. And let's do the points inside of the game mode. This is the one that controls the scoring. So it makes more sense to do it in here. So let's here make a custom event and let's call it add scroll. And this add scroll is going to add points. So here in the variables, we want to make a new variable and we want to call it scroll counter. So it's going to add +1 every time we loot a scroll. So what we want to do is pull it out here. Oops, not a set, just take a get out and do ++. And this way we want to add 1 scroll every time we loot this the scroll. What you can do is either create this custom event just like this, or you can use the Blueprint interface. And since I want to give you an exercise in Blueprint interfaces because it's so important to understand, let's try to create this in a Blueprint interface instead. So we want to create a Blueprint interface for the game mode. So let's go ahead, go inside of the interfaces, create a Blueprint interface, call it int game mode. And let's double click it. And here we need to add a function or an event, sorry, called add scroll. So let's delete this one, compile, save. Inside of the game mode, let's call it add scroll. And inside of here, let's see, add scroll, this is fine. Okay, so let us here go inside of the class settings, and in the interfaces, let's add the int game mode, which we added, and now you can see this event. And if I just right click and write add scroll, oops, not this one, we need the event. So here we have something called message, and we have this add scroll, which is the event. And you can see this is actually not being added because we have to compile and save, compile, save, compile, save, and now we can add it. So this is I don't want to edit this video out because actually I want to show you the mistakes so you can learn, because now you can see add the event scroll and you can do it. So remember to compile and save, this is very important. Also, a good trick I can show you is here, the 3 dots beside the compile, you can click them, and here on save and compile, you can click on successful only. So every time you click compile and it's successful, it is going to automatically save. So you don't need to click compile and save all the time. Okay, so let's hook up this game mode. So now every time we load a scroll, we need to say plus plus. So this custom event that we made here, we need to call it here in the begin overlap, because every time we walk into this, if this is true, we want to add 1 to this counter, and then we want to destroy the actor. Okay, so we need a way to call this blueprint interface event, and the way we do this is we need to say get game mode, because this is inside of the game mode, and then we need a reference to this game mode, so we need to do this too. So inside of the interface, go ahead and make another function and call it set game mode ref, and inside of the output we can choose the variable as gm. We called it gm death collector, and select that one. It's the same name as this game mode. This is what you're trying to refer to. So let's go back to the interface, and here we can call it game mode. Okay, so going back to this game mode, we can double click this function, and here we can write self, because now we are referencing this game mode as self, so now it knows it's this game mode. And now we can go back to BP scroll, and from this get game mode we can say set game mode ref, and it's the message. This is from the interface, and now we call this set game mode ref, and now we have this game mode, and from this game mode the thing we want is to call this event called add scroll. So going here, writing add scroll, and this is a message because this is from the interface, and let's hook it up with the destroy. So every time we overlap with the scroll, we are going to add 1 to the scroll, and then we are going to do something else, whatever we want to do. So since we haven't learned about user interfaces, and I actually want to keep this away from this course, I want to make a full user interface course. So here, let's actually just use a print string and just say, actually, let's use a format for now, format text, and say you have loaded, and we need a number so far. So now it's going scroll so far. So now it's going to say you have loaded, for example, 5 scrolls so far. And we need to hook this counter up to this format text, and we need to the print string, which we can hook it up to, just like this, and hook up everything. And now it's going to print you have loaded and the amount of scrolls so far. Okay, so let's try to put more scrolls. So I'm going to hold Alt and duplicate this a couple of times. So just like this, click play and see what happens. you go inside of this, you've loaded 1 scroll so far, 2 scrolls so far, 3 scrolls so far. Okay, so now it's working as we want it to. And just for small adjustments, I want to go in the viewport. Let's reduce the size of this one a bit. So let's go ahead and reduce the sphere to something like this. Let's compile and click play and see if this is working fine. So now we can load the scrolls. And you can always make them more interesting by making them disappear with an animation. And you can actually use the timeline to maybe affect the size of the scrolls. So maybe they get smaller when you load them. And you can use a timeline to fade away the scroll. But let's keep it simple for now. This is looking great. Let's double click and let's click on this sphere again. Let's go down and hit hidden in game so we don't see it in game. And now it's working. Now we can walk around and loot the scrolls as we want. And it's going to print out how many scrolls we have looted. So before we end the video, let's actually place some of those scrolls around. So I'm going to add, let's take the player start. I'm going to rotate it so it starts this direction. I'm going to move it back so the sphere starts here. And let's add some scrolls. So I want to add one here. Let's add one here. Let's just put them all around. Just like this. Okay, so now we have a couple of scrolls and the level looks complete. We can now go around and load the scrolls. And the next thing we want to do is actually, when we load the scrolls, we want to go ahead and finish here. And you can see here we can't really move on the platform. So the next lesson is about this platform. Let's try to make it work. Okay, so now we are going to make the scroll, and instead of a coin, I actually want to make a scroll. I think this is a bit more interesting. And what I found also is this scroll here under the 3D and the readables. We have this SM scroll, and this is also made for Boardcraft. I think it was a bit more interesting. Let's make scrolls instead of coins. So now we have to make these lootable scrolls. And the way we do this is go ahead and create an actor blueprint. So right click on the blueprints, create a blueprint class, and then select actor. We don't really need movement or anything, so we're going to make a simple actor. Call it BP scroll. And double click it. And inside of here, in the components, we want to add a static mesh. So a simple mesh, and we're going to call it scroll. Now under here and under the static mesh here in the details panel, we are going to find the scroll. So searching for scroll, clicking on it. Or another thing is, if you have it here in the view or in the content browser down here, you can also have taken here and dragged it on top of this one. And this one is the BP, sorry. So we have to go on the 3D, readables, and SM scroll, and you can drag it on top of it. Okay, so now we have this scroll, and you can see here, if we drag it out to the world, now we have a scroll, and this is cool. So if we click play, this is looking cool. And so now we have a scroll we can loot. A problem with this, or not a problem, but it looks boring. It needs a bit more movement. For example, hovering up and down. So let's do this. Let's delete this scroll for now. Go back to blueprints, double click the BP scroll. And inside of here, we want to do a code. So do some blueprints. Remove these events down here. Let's do the begin play. And now I want to teach you about the timeline. So go over here and write timeline. And there's something called add timeline. So what a timeline is, actually let me rename it first. And I'm just going to call it scroll movements. So what a timeline is, you can make smooth movements with a timeline. So for example, you can imagine a door in the game and the door opens smoothly. This is done with a timeline. Or if you have a day and night system and the sun goes up and then the sun goes down, you also do this smoothly with a timeline. In this case, we want to move the scroll up and down slowly. And this is also done with a timeline. So we can make smooth movements or loopable movements with this. So here in the begin play, instead of starting it from play, let's do play from start. So it's going to play the animation from start. And before we do anything, let's double click this timeline. You get into a graph like this. And here you can add different graphs. You can add a float track. So this is the float variable. Just like if you made a variable here, this is a number with decimals. You can make a vector. You can make an event track. And you can make a color track. So for this, let's see what we need. What do we need here? So the thing we are trying to do is we are trying to adjust the location of this scroll. So we are changing the location. So it starts here, for example, and we want to set the new location to be here, and then here, and then here, and so on. So we're trying to adjust the location. So try to take this scroll mesh, and here we are writing location, and you can see something called set relative location. So click on this one and hook it up to update. So we want to update the location of the scroll. Okay, so the new location is going to be plugged in here. So we actually, whoops, I'm going to delete that again. So we actually need a vector. So double click this timeline and we want to add a vector track because this is the input we want to add. And now give it a name. Let's name it movement or location alpha. Location alpha. So this is going to be the smooth movement. And this name is also going to appear over here. So this one is actually going to be plugged into here. Okay, so before we do anything, let's double click this timeline. And here we have the X, Y, and Z. So right click and click add key to all curves. Let's add 2 more keys. Now, you can see here that if I drag this away, this is the X-axis, this is the Y-axis, and this is the Z-axis. Because this is a vector, remember we have 3 numbers in a vector. So let me control Z, undo all of these movements, so let them be here. I want to mark all of them, select all of them, and do 0 in the time up here. And for the last one, here you can choose the length of the timeline. I want it to be 3 seconds. So the whole movement is going to be 3 seconds and then it will go looping again. So here I want to select the last points and do 3. So here it's the time 3 seconds and the value is 0. So now it's here. And this one needs to be in the middle because it's going to loop up and down and then it's going to continue looping this movement. So I'm going to put 1.5 so it's in the middle. And let me try to do this. You have to test this. I think 20, the last time I did it, 20 was the perfect number, but let's try to see. You have to test it out. And in order to see all of the graph, you have to click these 2 buttons. So zoom to fit horizontally and vertically. So now you have this. Let's go back to the event graph and we have this hooked up to update, and let's hook up the location alpha. Compile and click play and see what happens. And you can see now it's actually moving. It moved not upwards but to all the sides, and the reason is we actually don't want to affect all location. So try to break it up, do a make vector, and we only want to affect the Z, so up and down. And also with this we can do break vector and we can actually hook it up in the Z. Okay, and the other ones we want to be 0, 0, that's fine. Just like this. And in order to straighten them, you can hold and click Q. Okay, so now we have this. And let's compile, click play and see what happens. Now it's moving up and down. So this is looking correct, but it's not looping. And this is because you have to double click the timeline. And up here in the top, you have something called loop. And we can also use the last keyframe. So compile, click save, click on play and see what happens if I make it full screen. Now it's moving up and down. You can make it a bit smoother if you zoom out here, you select all the points, and you can right click and do auto here. Now it's doing this smooth movement to our graph. And I think we want to make this a bit larger because it's not really moving up and down that much. So maybe 40. Let me try 40. I'll click on play. And now it's looking a lot better, but it needs to be smoother when it ends. So over here, we want to, let's try to make this a bit smoother. Something like this. Compile and click play and see what happens. Okay, so now it's looking great. And now when I walk into it, right now it's too far up on the sky, so let's move it down actually. Just like this. Click on play. And when I move into it, you can see it's actually blocking me. We need to remove the collision from this scroll because we don't need it to push us away. So double click here in the static mesh. We go down to collision and we remove the collision. So just do no collision. Okay, so now we can actually just move inside of the scroll without doing anything. So the next step we want to do is actually make it loadable. What we did now is creating this timeline, and this timeline is played from the start. We are updating this animation, the new location for this scroll. And in the next lesson, let's actually make this scroll loadable. Let us now do the character movement. So I like to do the movement inside of the player controller. So go ahead and double click this player controller. And I'm just going ahead and deleting all of these events. I will make my own or add them if needed. And what we need to do is use something called torque. So here we can write torque. And if you don't find it, remove this context sensitive. And we have something called that torque in degrees and radians. We're going to use the one called in radians. So now torque is a force that you add to move the ball. So I will show you how to move it. So torque is a force to apply to the ball so we can move it around. And this is actually not what we use to characters that have 2 legs, 2 arms to walk around. But for balls like this, we have to use a force to move them around, which is called torque. Okay, so now we have torque, but we need an event. Remember, we need to start with an event to connect with this function. And the event we are going to do is when you click W, you want to move forward and so on. So instead of going in here and writing the W key and doing this, this is hard coded. You can do it like this, but the problem is that if you are in game and the player goes in the settings menu and the player want to change the W key to something else, the player can't do that because W is hard coded as the event to move forward. So a better way to do this is go to the file or the edit project settings, and inside of here we have something called input. Inside of the input we have something called action mapping and axis mapping. The action mapping is when you click a button, and I can see here we have something called left click. Let me actually just remove it for now. So we have an action mapping and an axis mapping. So the action mapping is when you click one button. For example, if you click E to interact with the door, or if you click G to drop your weapon. But the axis mapping is the buttons we use to move and hold down. For example, the W to move around, or the S to move back, and so on. So in this case, we are going to use an axis mapping. And here, let's call it move forward. And here we are going to assign a button. So we can use right W key or just W to find it. And this is the W key. And you can add another key here because actually we're moving forward and backward. But I usually call it move forward. You can also call it move horizontal and vertical. That's up to you, whatever makes sense. So W and S to move forward and backward. Instead of finding the keys here, I want to show you a better way. You can click on this button here and you click on the S key on the keyboard and this automatically assigns it. Okay, so we have the move forward, move and we need the move left or move right. I should call it move right. So left and right. So using the D key and using the A key. Okay. So here we also have scales. So these needs to be in opposite directions because the one move forward and the one move backward, which is a negative number. And the same on this one, D is 1 and A is the, you can imagine it as an axis, and moving up is positive, moving down is negative. So just like this. So now I have move forward and move right, and these we can actually use as events. So close the input for now, we can come in later if we need something. And open the player controller, and here you can write move forward. You can see here we have the axis event. Click on that, and we have the move forward event. So connect it with this torque, and we need a target for this torque. And the target for this torque is actually this mesh over here. This is the ball. We need this ball here. We need this static mesh component. So the way we do this, remember, now we need to communicate with the other blueprint. So now we need to use either casting or a blueprint interface. So let's go ahead and use a blueprint interface. I like doing that. So let's minimize this, and we need to set a reference to this ball. So let's right click, create a new folder, call it interfaces. Inside of here, let's create a new interface. So blueprint and blueprint interface. Call it int ball. And inside of this interface, I want to create a new function called set ball ref. So this sets the ball reference. We create an output and call it BP ball. This is what we called the ball blueprint class, and this is an object reference. So the name is the same as the class we created here, because this is what we want to reference to. So now we have it, and let's call it ball here. This is the value, and let's go over to ball. This is BP ball now, and inside of here, remember, we have to add blueprint interfaces before they can work. So inside of BP ball, we need to go to class settings, click on add, and write int ball. So now we add it, and you can see the interface appears. So if you click on it, double click the set ball ref, and here, what ball do you want? What is the reference? The reference is self, because we are already inside of BP ball. So this is the reference we want. So now what's cool is we can go ahead inside of the death collector. So this is the player controller, and inside of here we can say pawn. And remember, if you don't know what to search for, because when we need to call interfaces, blueprint interface functions, we have to call first the parent class. So what is the general function? This is the pawn. We need to call the pawn first. Just like what we did with the game mode and player controller, we wrote get player controller, and then we reference to the custom player controller. The same thing with this pawn. We have to call this pawn first. So if you don't know what it's called, just write pawn. This is how you find them the easiest way. And here you can see something called get player pawn. Okay, so when you get player pawn, you can then reference to this pawn you have. This is the custom pawn. So we're not going to say cast to. We could have done it like cast to BP ball, but we're not creating casting. We already have an interface, and the function is called set ball reference. This is going to call this reference, and it already knows that the ball reference is self, which is this one. So let's say set ball ref. Whoops, and this is the wrong one. Set ball ref. Remember that it needs to be the message because this is the interface function. And now as the ball, or as this blueprint class, we can now actually grab this ball static mesh component. So going to write ball, and now you can see, you can click on get ball. So now you have this ball component that you can add to this target, and this is what we want to add torque to. So let's connect it and click on compile, and the error removes. And now we need to add the torque. So now we need to add the movement. And before we add the movement, before I forget it actually, let's go ahead inside of the edit project settings and maps and modes, and let's change the default pawn class to BP ball. So now we have this pawn class. Let's close it down and just double click on the game mode just to make sure that it's set to BP ball. That's correct. And just go to the world settings and make sure it's BP ball. That is correct as well. Okay, so this is set up, and let's go back to the player controller. And now we need to decide in what direction we need to add the torque, because the torque is a force that is added to the ball, and we can add the force to the x-axis, to the y-axis, or to the z-axis. So we have to decide which one of these axes is forward and which one is left and right. Okay, so let's go ahead, and the way you can figure it out is just go ahead and create a cube. So whatever shape you want to create, and move it up, and you can see here the y-axis we can use to move forward and backward, or we can use the x-axis, so it's up to you. So we can actually use this x-axis, and remember the red color is the x-axis. You can see it here to the right. So we can use this x-axis, and we can use the y-axis to move left and right. Let's try to do that. So let's go over to the player controller, and inside of here you can either right click and click split struct pin to view the individual axis, or you can drag it out and write make vector, and you can do that as well. I'm just going to make the vector. And the x-axis, this is actually when you press W and move forward, this is actually going to move along the axis. So this is the axis mapping we created earlier. So let's move ahead, and moving forward and backward, let's put it to the x. Okay, so this is because here if I insert it again, whatever shape, so applying it to the x is actually this way, so it's going to move forward this way. So moving in the positive and negative. So let's go over and add torque to the x, and let's compile and save. Let's click play, and nothing happens when you try to click. And this is because you can see here it's actually flying above the ground as well, and this is a bug we have. We don't have any physics. We probably need to simulate physics. So if I click escape, it actually says that here too, Sphere has to have simulate physics enabled. So let's go ahead, double click on this ball. We can click on the ball here, and down here we have something called simulate physics, because torque is physics and we have to apply it. Let's compile and click play again and see what happens. We fall down, and when I click W, it's not moving. Let's actually see here. Let's actually place a player start somewhere in the map so we don't start on the top. So go ahead and click on create, and you have something called player start. Put this player start here anywhere in the map. Click on play, and now we are on the ground. So if I click W, nothing happens. And this is because the force we are applying, the torque we are applying, is not strong enough. So what we want to do is just write multiply. So we're going to multiply the torque. Let's multiply it by this number and see what happens. And let's put this end result inside of the vector. So now we are multiplying the force when we click W. And now we are moving, and this is looking so weird. And this is because the camera is following the ball, okay? It's following the ball, and we don't want to do that. So let's click ahead on the spring arm. And in the spring arm, we have to go here to the top. And this is the rotation. That's what's causing the problem. And instead of setting the rotation type to relative, then set it to world. Okay, compile and save. And let's take a look. Also, I think our ball is moving in the wrong direction, because this is the x-axis. We have put the torque on the x-axis, and this is the x-axis, so when we press W, it's actually going to move to the side. So actually it needs to be on the Y to move forward and backward. So let me disconnect it here and just put it on the Y. Simple fix. Let's click play and see what happens. Awesome, now it works. So you can move forward and backward. I think the movement is way too fast. So let's remove 1, 0 from here and compile and play. I think that's more reasonable. That's fine. So what is that number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. 1 million here you can put. Okay, so now this is working. Now we have to move to the left and right. Remember the event we made before is move right. And we need to choose this event, not the value. Choosing the event, let's copy and paste this because we need the same information. So let's copy paste all of this, and we can also copy this torque. Let's connect it. Okay, so now we have the same information. And just remember to copy paste if you have the same thing. We don't need to waste time on creating all the same stuff again. So here we have the axis value, and again you can just multiply it by the same number. Move it a bit this way. And multiplying it, and this way we need to move to the side. So this is actually the x values. This is moving to the side. So to the x and compile, click play. Let's try to click AW and DNS. You can see here now you're actually moving the opposite direction, because when I press D, it moves to the left, and now when I press A, it moves to the right, and it needs to be the opposite of what it is right now. So to fix this, go to edit, and inside of project settings, inside of input, and here when you press D and A, these actually need to be switched. So -1 here and 1 here. Okay, so let's play, and now we are moving correctly. So now I can press AW, D, and S, and I can move my ball. So this is the movement we have done so far. And if I click F11 to see how far I am away from the screen, I can just make the camera a bit further away, and then I think I'm done with this. So click the spring arm, instead of 600 you can make it to 800. So the spring arm is a bit further away, so we can see a bit more. And this is the result we have so far, and I'm happy with it. Okay, this is looking great. So this was it for the player movement. Now we have a ball and it can move. And if we need to increase the speed, you can just go ahead inside of the player controller and adjust this this multiplication number. So make it higher if you want to move faster. So the next thing we want to do is creating the coin on the ground. So let's go over to the next lesson and create that. Okay, so the character pawn is just going to be a ball that's rolling around that we are going to control. So let's create this character. Right click here and create a blueprint class. And now we have to decide what the character should be. We have something called pawn, we have something called character. And remember that the pawn is an actor that can be possessed, so we can actually control this pawn. We also have a character which has the ability to walk around, but you can imagine a character with 2 legs, 2 arms, and the thing we have is actually just a ball. So this will be enough for us. We just need to control the ball. Don't create an actor, because an actor can't receive input from a controller. So we have to choose a pawn, and let's call it BP ball. Okay, so this is the player. Double click on it. And inside of here, we just want to make a simple sphere. So go ahead, click on add a sphere. And here you can rename it. The way you rename is either right click and rename, or the faster way, which I usually do, is just clicking F2. And you can do it with everything. You can just click F2. Click F2 and call it ball. And this ball here, you can see here, if I compile, save, and close it, if I drag it out, you can see this is the ball that is actually going to be controlled. Double click on the ball, and let's go ahead And here we can add a camera. We need a camera to view the ball, and we need like a camera like this. We need like a top-down view on the ball. So go ahead and go click on add. And before we add this camera, we need to add a spring arm. And what a spring arm is you can imagine it a holder for the camera. So go ahead and add the camera. So now we have the ball or the spring arm is attached to the ball, and the camera is attached to the spring arm. So now if we click on the spring arm and we click on E to rotate, you can see if we rotate, the camera is attached to the spring arm, and we can actually just rotate it to get the correct view of the ball. Compile. So maybe we want this view, but we will always adjust it when we play the game. If this is not satisfying when we play the game, we can always go in and change the rotation a little bit. If you don't want it to snap, you can always remove this snap up here and just rotate it to your liking. Okay, this is fine for now. And over here in the spring arm, you can also change the arm length. So how far away you're watching the ball. So this is okay for now. We can always try to adjust it later. Let's make it 600 for now. And this is fine. So let's click save all. And this is looking good. And this was it for the character setup. So now we have a character that we can place to the ground here. And you can see that we have a small bug here. You can see if it goes on the ground, the camera sticks like this. And if we put it up on the ground, it will be correct. So what we can do actually, this is because the camera here, or the spring arm, sorry, it has something called do collision test. And this is because when it hits something, it's going to do collisions with it. But we don't want to make collisions. So now when we take it down the ground, you can see it's actually not bugging, okay? And also another bug is if we drag it out, you can see the ball is actually beneath the ground. So double click on the ball and let's go to the viewport, click on the ball here. And I'm just going to apply this snapping. So click, move it up once. You can see it's now above the ground. You can also, to be precise, this is now precise, but imagine if you had something you wanted to be more precise on. You can use these view modes. So go to the left or right view mode, and you can see this ball needs to be above this red line, which is the ground. Compile and save. Let's go back to the perspective mode, and let's go ahead and close this down, place the ball. You can see now it's above the ground, and the camera is also correct. So if we right click on this ball and click on pilot BP ball, you can see this is actually the view of the ball that we are currently in. To move out of this this view here, you can actually just eject the camera here. So move out of the camera. And let's delete this ball for now. So this is very cool. Blueprint classes, you can always drag them in and they're ready to go. So let's go ahead in the next lesson and learn how to do the character movement. So let's go ahead and set up the game mode and player controller. So over here in the blueprints folder, right click and click on blueprint class. And let's choose the player controller. It doesn't matter what you choose first. Let's just create the player controller and call it PC. And let's just call it the name of the game. So Death Collector. And right click, create a blueprint class, and let's create the game mode. And remember, the player controller is an actor responsible for controlling a pawn used by the player. So we will use it to control the character we are creating in a bit. And the game mode is defining the rules of the game, the scoring, and so on. So create a game mode, call it GM Death Collector. So now we have a game mode and a player controller. In order to use this game mode and the player controller, these are the custom ones. Let's go ahead in the edit and the project settings. And inside of here, we have something called maps and modes. So inside of here, we have the default game mode, and we have to change this to the custom one we just made, the GM Death Collector. This is our game mode. Click on the arrow here on the selected game mode, and you will see all of these classes. In the default pawn, we don't really have a default pawn yet. We will create it in a bit, but we have a player controller. So let's change this one to the PC Death Collector, which is our custom player controller. Let's close it down. And just to make sure, go inside of the game mode here. And inside of the game mode, just check here to the right that the player controller is actually the PC Death Collector, and this is correct. So this is fine. Let's close it. And inside of the world settings to the right here, so click on the world settings. You also have to change it to the map. So remember, click on the map you want to change it for. So let's start with the map Underworld. Here in the world settings, change the game mode to GM Death Collector. And just make sure that the player controller is PC Death Collector. So this is correct. Let's click on the map end. Click on the world settings. Change the game mode to GM Death Collector and PC Death Collector. So remember, this is a mistake that many makes. You will get confused why your game is not working the way you want it to. And this is because maybe you forgot to actually assign the game mode. So remember to assign the game mode. And let's go ahead and open up the player controller. I just want to see if we have to do anything here. And this is looking fine. So let's close it again. Let me click on the game mode. And you can click here to open the full editor. And this is because the blueprint class is empty. This is why this is going to be full screen. So click on open full blueprint editor and it will open up like before. And I just want to see if I need to edit something here. And it also looks fine. So let's close it down. And this is fine for now. We will always go back and do some changes when we need to. So let's try to set up the character pawn now.